speech classes, and so I was given a list of topics, and from these topics I chose a very hard topic to talk about, but it's very important in our world. It has an impact on our community, and it has an impact from you guys for the good, because you guys as Salmon Elks members have done some good things in our community, and my topic is child abuse. So for about the past 4.5 years, I volunteered at Lemhi's After School Promise and at different events at the Mahoney House to kind of help out in Salmon and get an insight on the children that we have here in Salmon. And nearly 5 years ago, as I was helping the little readers at After School Promise, a little girl stood out to me. She was about 1st or 2nd grade. She didn't really stand out. She wasn't very sweet. She was naughty, acting out. She wasn't following directions. She was disliked by the other kids. The other kids didn't want to sit with her at the meal table. And I noticed some things like she would wear the same clothing all the time. She didn't look like she'd been bathed, or her hair wasn't combed. And I'm not going to lie, me, and along with her peers, I didn't want to sit down next to her and help her with her homework. Now fast forward almost 5 years later, this same girl, she's interacting with other children. She's at the preteen table at After School Promise program. She's laughing, her clothing fits, and she's clean. She teases about her homework. She doesn't want to do it, but she does it anyways, and she gets very good grades. And when I look at her now, I see a girl that's happy. She's on the verge of being a teenager, and I see her interacting with other people. Now, what would make a difference? This child has spent 2 years in the foster care program with a family that truly cares about her. She has lived in fear, she has experienced neglect and hunger, and she's one of the many children in our community that has been affected by child abuse. But because of intervention, she now has hope and she stands a chance, and she lives here in Salmon, Idaho. Now, every year thousands of children are welcomed into this world, and we typically grow up thinking about watching Disney movies or maybe going to the park and getting ice cream, and we typically don't think about that small percentage of children that don't get to experience that. They are forced to deal with things that we could only dream of. Child abuse affects 1 in every 29 children nationwide, and in 2011 there were over 6,000 reports of child abuse just in Idaho. This does not include the number of cases that were not reported, were not followed up on, and continue to exist quietly away from the spotlight. So let's explore the different types of child abuse. Today we're going to talk about mental, sexual, and physical abuse. So mental abuse is one of the most common. If you look to the girl to the left, you wouldn't think that she was abused. Mental abuse is one of the hardest to define because it's one of the hardest to see. But some of the components can include ridicule, degradation, excessive criticism, inappropriate demands, and or humiliation. And mental abuse falls hand in hand with neglect. And a child who is being neglected is a child that can be left with no food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision. The local Child Protective Service officer states that mental abuse and or neglect are the hardest types of abuse to prove in court because evidence is harder to see and is subjective. So now reverting back to this picture, can you tell if this child has had a meal today or not? You probably wouldn't be able to tell. But this is why we don't think of mental abuse when we think of abuse. But over 97,000 children are emotionally abused each year. And unfortunately, many children are subjected to name-calling and harassment from people who are supposed to be shielding them from this behavior. Most people are under the false influence that neglect isn't as serious as other forms of abuse. But in reality, it is the most frequent cause of death in children. So next we move to sexual abuse. Its varieties can be overwhelming. Whether it be indecent exposure or the selling of sexual services, the effects can be devastating. A child can be left with effects of guilt, insomnia, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. Over 200,000 children are sexually abused each year, and 20% of women and over 9% of men in Idaho were sexually abused when they were children. 85 to 90% of cases involve a predator known to the child, and 35% of cases involve a family member. Some behavioral indicators of a child that has been sexually abused are the sudden reluctance to go somewhere, be with a certain person, if they're acting out in sexual maturity that isn't appropriate for their age group, and there's other various types of signs and things like that. And the last type of abuse that we're going to talk about today is the most common, and that's physical abuse. This can be defined as the non-accidental physical injury of a child. This can include beating, burns, broken bones, welts, or serious internal injury. Simply, if the caretaker creates a situation where a child can be harmed, it's considered physical abuse. If a child avoids physical contact with others or wears clothing to conceal their bruises or cuts, these are signs that they have been physically abused. So over 800,000 children are physically abused each year in Idaho. Effects include death, which 5 children die every day in the nation, according to physical abuse. Physical abuse also leads to delayed growth and or development. And if you want to go to the next slide. When we look to the picture of the left, we see the picture of a brain of a 5-year-old child with normal brain development. And the one to the right is the picture of a brain of the same 5-year-old child who has been through some physical abuse in their lifetime. So we may not always see these signs, but the effects of child abuse can be lifelong. Over 80% of children that were abused met the criteria for at least one psychiatric disorder at the age of 21, and abused children are 11 times more likely to be involved in crime as an adult. It wasn't until the early 70s that child abuse was considered a crime in America, and in 2007 it remains the least recognized and least reported crime. We need to learn how to recognize abuse so we can report it, therefore saving thousands of innocent lives. Luckily, there is a way to prevent these horrible things from happening. There are plenty of hotlines and associations, such as Child Help USA, as well as the Safe Child Association. You simply call and they alert social services about the problem. Social services will take action from there, whether giving advice on how to deal with the child, or in severe cases, removing the child from the home. There are also local organizations, such as the Mahoney House, where they can be contacted for advice. There's a quote here from Bob Greene that states, "If you know in your heart, if you sense something is wrong, don't go away. You have to be as relentless as those children can't be. They have no voice at all." And I want to thank you, Elks members, for giving me the opportunity to come talk to you guys today. And I want to thank you for your involvement in our community, from your guys' charity food baskets to help needy families, to your support in programs such as Lemhi's After School Promise. I really want to thank you guys and know that you guys have an impact and you're helping those kids in our community that may have been abused as a child.